Introducing the Migraine and Headache Program. Migraines need never happen. The missing link. Specialists now realize they'd known the migraine remedy all along. Migraine's missing link was never actually missing, it was staring us in the face. Finally, somebody has put the pieces together, and my 10-year migraine agony is over. No drugs, treatments, or any costly procedures. It's never nice to realize you suffered so much for so long, only to find out that none of that suffering was necessary. But that's exactly what happened with my long, painful experience of migraines. And when I say my migraines were painful, I'm talking about hide myself away, close the drapes, shut out the whole world kind of painful. During a migraine attack, I was too ill to work, too miserable to socialize, too useless to be any good to anyone, to put it bluntly. Like most migraine sufferers, I tried all the standard treatments. Over time I spent over $5,000 on meds. But I still had regular, disabling migraines. Then I got really clever and followed a program that addressed migraine triggers. The migraine trigger program had helped, it provided some relief. But then one day, when I least expected it, my world changed forever. The creator of the trigger program called me and asked if I would trial something he was working on. He'd pulled together medically validated migraine data, and created a program that, he predicted, would rid people of their migraines permanently. 3 weeks after I tried his program, I had my last ever migraine headache. My last one. I used to have migraines every 10 or 12 days. I now haven't had one for 14 months. I'm not expecting one ever again. I used to suffer from migraines. Not headaches. Not bad headaches. Not even severe headaches. Migraines. Shocking, excruciating, life-denying, throbbing, horrible migraines. The kind of pain that frequently made my eyes water, if not cry. The kind of pain that drove me to my bed, my place to hide away, to escape from the world and soak in the torment that was my regular migraine attack. My migraine history wasn't much different from many other people's. They started off bad. Then, over time, they got worse. At first they were throbbing pains on one side of my head. Sometimes they were not too awful. Occasionally they were manageable. As months and then years rolled by, they steadily worsened. They became more frequent. They also lasted longer. When they first started, they'd be over by the next day. But they eventually ran into more than 2 days, and those 2-day migraine attacks disrupted so much in my life. As time wore on, my neck began to hurt. My sensitivity to light and noise became more acute. Originally I would sleep the migraine out in my own bed. But as they worsened, even the slightest sound my partner made caused me pain. In the end, at the onset of a migraine, I had to retreat to our second bedroom, to be alone and away from everyone and everything. Another thing, I'd always felt nausea with my migraines. But that nausea eventually became actual vomiting. Nobody likes being sick, but I really hated it. Strangely, of all the horrible symptoms of my migraines, it's the fact that I am no longer sick that makes me most happy. Migraines changed my life. As my migraines became worse, my life also changed as a result. At first, when they had been less severe, I had simply dealt with them as they arose. As the migraine wore on, I would shut myself away in our spare bedroom, close the door, pull the curtains, and almost literally hide under my duvet. I'd close my eyes and try to will the pain away. The onset of the migraine slowed me down. The migraine itself more or less rendered me useless. And the day or two afterward left me drained, sluggish and deflated. Those headaches robbed me of 3 or 4 days of life. The things I couldn't do, the plans I had to suddenly cancel. But I quickly found it wasn't just the migraine itself that affected my life. The fear of them, the realization that they could hit me at any time, influenced so many of my plans and my actions. A simple example. I couldn't take a job where I had to be alert and on my toes all day. Or where I would be dealing with customers. It had to be a job where, putting it bluntly, I could be quite ill from time to time, and then make up for the lost work hours in my own time. After all, who would hire me if my migraine actively hurt their business? The sheer unpredictability of my migraines made even the most ordinary things difficult. I could drive short distances, but longer distances always created a problem. What if I became ill at the other end of my journey? Who would I call to pick up me, and my car? My productivity, both in my personal and work life, was heavily knocked by my migraines. At times I simply couldn't do a thing for myself or for anyone else. One of the worst things about migraines occurs when you're not even experiencing one. It's the fear of them. Because just not knowing when to expect the next attack, wondering if a migraine will suddenly pop up and ruin a busy day at work, a trip to the cinema or a social gathering with friends. The mental effort of dealing with background worries about when it will strike next was exhausting in itself. Those years of suffering migraines were difficult years indeed. I don't miss them. So many migraine remedies but so little success. There are millions of migraine sufferers, and before I finally cured mine, I searched everywhere for some sort of relief. But although there's tons of information out there, I gradually realized it all pretty much falls into just two categories. Take meds, get treatment, medical stuff, in other words avoid the triggers that turn on the migraine attack in the first place. There's a hierarchy of treatments, each one a step on from the previous one. There's lots to try, plenty to fail at, and, of course, an array of potential remedies to spend your money on. I tried plenty. I spent plenty of dollars too. And no matter what I tried, there was always something else I could have a go at just around the corner. Not all doom and gloom? Of course, some medications do work, in some ways. There are so many variations of migraine sufferer. And, with so many medications on the market, it's inevitable that sometimes a sufferer and a medication are just right for each other. A match made in heaven, you might say. The sufferer doesn't usually get rid of the migraine. They still attack when they least expect it, but the meds make it more manageable. For the rest of us though, it can be a case of either soldiering on through the pain and nausea, or just sitting it out in darkness and silence until it goes. And as I found, the meds rarely work in the way we'd like them to. As in, getting rid of the migraines once and for all. Sure, plenty of individuals get some relief from their symptoms from time to time. I knew people whose drugs, if taken at the earliest stages of a migraine, would help make the migraines less severe than they would otherwise have been. The results though are unreliable. Sometimes those same people will take their meds early and the migraine rushes in anyway. As if they'd never taken them at all. My doctor warned me about taking too many drugs for my migraines. He pointed out the irony that taking too much medication had the side effect of medication overuse headache. A headache caused by my headache medications. I did laugh when he told me that. But it's actually not that funny. Migraine remedies are hope and pray remedies. In fact, during my battle with migraines I developed a theory, that when a condition has so many medicines, and absolutely none of them work reliably for all or even most sufferers, then the condition itself is not properly understood. When I suffered migraines I would try the various medications and treatments one at a time. And with each I would just hope hard for relief. I quickly discovered that hope is not a good strategy. I also realized that the drugs companies are actually trying things out and, at best, getting temporary, short-lived successes. Their offerings were hit and miss, unreliable and uncertain. And they're tackling symptoms, not causes. If they successfully tackled causes, then migraines would end. But people like to pop pills because that's easy to do, and we're conditioned to believe there's a pill for every problem. And pharma likes to sell pills because they make a lot of money. So pills it is. For a while I thought tackling triggers was the key. On the brighter side, I found a lot of conversation around what triggers migraines. Triggers are emotional, physical, environmental or dietary events that set your migraine in motion. There are literally dozens of different potential triggers. Most people's migraines are affected by just a handful of them. The trick is to work out the few that affect you most, and then do your best to avoid them. The avoidance of triggers was my favorite approach. It's free of cost to do because it mostly requires you to stop doing certain things. More than that, it held out the hope of a cure for my migraines. If I could just pinpoint the one or two things that caused my migraines, I could simply make sure I never did them again. And everything would be fine after that. If only. Identifying your personal migraine triggers can be quite difficult. For some of us, our triggers are almost impossible to spot. For sure, if you can spot one or two triggers, then it can make a world of difference. I should know. When I first started out trying to cure my migraines, I tried everything imaginable. And triggers seemed to me like a good place to start. Turned out it was. I found a guide to triggers online, with some very helpful advice on how to spot and deal with my own. The guide was created by a gentleman by the name of Christian Goodman. I worked through his guide and two things happened. I realized I had a couple of primary triggers mostly around posture and stress. As triggers, these two are pretty difficult to address, especially the stress. But at least I knew. At least I had something I could do about my migraines. I now had a tool that I could use to reduce the effects of my migraines. True. I was never able to prevent them, but if I got things right, they were sometimes less intense. Given the awfulness of my migraines, anything was better than nothing. It was genuinely uplifting to suddenly have some control over what was happening to me, even if I couldn't actually stop it. But here's the thing. Managing triggers is very difficult. First, they're hard to identify, and I suspect that I still had one or two unidentified triggers for my own migraines. Often, you think something is a trigger, but it isn't, it's actually just a symptom. Then, some triggers are just very difficult to manage. If your trigger is in some of the food you eat, then if you're lucky enough to be able to identify that food, then you can simply stop eating it. It's more difficult if it's a whole food group, dairy, say, or wheat. But it's still doable. You can cut these things out. But what if your trigger is something harder to get a hold of, more difficult to properly address? Background stress perhaps. Nervousness. Low mood. Energy loss. This kind of stuff is normal. It's part of everyday life for everybody who has a job or a family, or a job and a family. For some people, a level of anxiety or stress is just their normal default state. It's part of their makeup. For almost everyone, we find that such triggers are a common part of our lives at some point. Whenever things get tough, when we work harder than usual, or when we miss out on some sleep, that's when the trigger comes into play. Managing them is extremely difficult. But triggers are part of a dangerous migraine myth. The medical profession is united in one thing: they admit they don't properly understand the causes of migraines. Almost everything that's ever said about migraines in the medical press has nothing to do with curing the migraine itself. We talk about triggers, and managing them can help. We talk about meds, they're expensive but have some beneficial effects sometimes for some people. But meds deal with a migraine that's either about to happen or is in full flow. Meds are usually too late. And triggers, which are good to identify and are where most people's hopes lie, are not the actual cause of migraines. Let me repeat that. Because too many people think that if they get rid of their migraine triggers, then they've tackled their migraine's cause. Triggers are not the cause of your migraines. Here's a way of thinking about this that makes it clear. Why can some people drink a bucket of coffee and feel nothing while someone else drinks a cup and suffers 72 hours of migraine hell? How come Bob gets exhausted after a couple of stressful days at work but recovers after a good night's sleep, but John, who works with Bob and had exactly the same experiences, goes home to wild thumping head pains, ghastly light sensitivity and vomiting? How come Bob is refreshed the next day while John has to shut himself away for 48 hours to cope with his blisteringly painful headaches? It can't be the triggers. Can it? Both had exactly the same experience at work. Both came home tired and stressed. So both had the same triggers. Yet one is fine the next day while the other has severe migraines. There must be something else at work here. If you read Christian Goodman's trigger guide that I mentioned a moment ago, you'd realize that migraine triggers are everywhere. They are food triggers, psychological triggers, dietary triggers, environmental triggers. Endless triggers for migraines. Most of life is a migraine trigger. We all encounter migraine triggers almost every day of our lives. Yet only some of us actually get the migraines. I used to get migraines regularly. You still do, I'm guessing. But my sister doesn't get them. My best friends don't either. My boss never has a headache, let alone a migraine. They all experience many of these typical migraine triggers though. Migraine triggers without the migraine. Check it out now. Get for more information below of the description. Lorne Phil.